Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's get the Spotify Live started with some questions from the Patreon. Aditya says, what do you make of Cricket South Africa's decision to give preference to its T20 league over the ODI series in Australia? One of the reasons given by Cricket South Africa is that it wants to become self-sustainable and not dependent on hosting India for other revenues. Does this reason stand? Also, would eventually make white ball cricket redundant, bilateral white ball cricket redundant. Yeah, I think if you're thinking about it, there's absolutely no reason for any team out there in the world to continue to hope India's going to travel to them every 4 years. It doesn't make any sense. I said when England and New Zealand pulled out of Pakistan, if I was running Pakistan cricket, I'd just make the PSL better. I'd put a lot more resources into it. I'd make it longer. I'd make it out, if I was the PCB, their major financial thing. I think Cricket South Africa makes sense. As far as one-day cricket and T20 cricket go internationally, I've said for a long time that bilaterally, I don't think it makes that much sense anymore. It costs, if you think about it from a Test cricket perspective, a 2-test series is 10 days of cricket. It can be played in, 2 weeks? 10 limited overs games, even, 8 limited overs games. It's probably going to take you 3 weeks. And you're going to have similar amounts of money being spent on the preparation. I think people think that Test cricket doesn't make sense financially, but the bilateral series probably make the least sense financially. It's just that for a very long time, they were watched so heavily, especially ODIs, that it made more sense. That's not the case anymore. The audiences have already worked that out. And, I was writing about this in 2007 and 2008, that one-day cricket was the most likely to die bilaterally. The thing that's kept it alive so far really has been the fact that TV companies like to put so many ads into it. But as the revenue goes down in those ads, it's not as profitable anyway. So I can certainly see why South Africa are doing what they're doing. I think a lot of teams will start to do that. If you can make a profitable league at home that you control, and you don't need to worry about hurting the feelings of Australia or India or England, keeping everyone on board and being politically neutral, that's a much better way of doing it. That's why the Big Bash exists, I suppose, at a certain level. It's probably why, England put so much into the 100 as well. People don't want to be dependent on this stupid system, this bilateral system, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. Also, no one's ever made the proper money out of the bilateral system. That's the problem with South Africa. Is it's not that their games are not worth money. It's just that they're not sold as part of a whole package. And so broadcasters just pick them off as cheap fruit. Is cheap fruit the right way of putting it? Expensive fruit. Jake says, injuries permitting, how do you think Jofra Archer would get on in Stokes McCullum test team? Well, I mean, he'd go pretty well in any test team, injuries permitting. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, they've been talking about bowling their bowlers into the ground. He's probably the one that you don't want to bowl into the ground, although Mark Wood maybe is another one. So they might have to change the way that they think about that. But he certainly fits the attacking mindset. I've always thought that the reason that Jofra Archer could be one of the best bowlers in the world is very similar to why Jasprit Bumrah is one of the best bowlers in the world. It's that ability to hurt people by bowling very, very fast, but also to slow down a little bit and still be able to use the conditions in your favor. And I think Jofra probably does that even better than Bumrah does. The second part. The first part, I think Bumrah's probably the better one, and he probably has more of an in-the-middle game, if that makes sense. But we've seen Jofra bowl at 95 miles an hour and scare the hell out of people, and we've seen him bowl at 80 miles an hour and move the ball both directions. That ability is next level. And when he left, I don't think he was a big bowler of the wobble ball. My guess is that he's probably been working on that. There's no England bowler who's not going to bowl it in the future. They're so, obsessed by it. So I can't see any reason why Jofra Archer wouldn't make a big impact when it comes to the England team in this new setup. James asked, do you know if Australia still does Nerds versus Julios? Oh, so this is good. So Nerds versus Julios was basically a way, or Julios, I suppose, was basically a way back in the day of the cool guys pretending they were cool and the nerdy guys pretending that they were too smart to hang around with idiots. Incredibly weird concept. And he's put together 11s here. He's got Langer, Hayden, Ponting, Steve. I'm assuming that Steve Smith would be in the nerds. Steve Waugh, Border, Gilchrist, Stark, Lyon, Gillespie, McGrath, and in the Julios, it's Slater, Warner, Kawaja. Interesting to see where Kawaja fits in there. I think he might be a nerd. Mark Waugh, Michael Clark, Damian Martin, Matthew Wade, Pat Cummins, Mitchell Johnson, Warren, and Lee. So if I've got that team, I've got Stark, Lyon, Gillespie, McGrath, and I have Cummins, Johnson, Warren, and Lee. So I'll pick the nerds. You got the better bowling attack. But yeah, the whole thing, they don't do it anymore. I mean, there's always like, they just sort of change the way that they talk about themselves. Obviously, you know, what's Adam Zampa as part of the whatever it is, the loose unit team with him and Stoinis. So there's always that kind of thing within that Australian masculine culture. It's not really a cricket thing. So I do find that quite interesting, but I don't even think they would know what a Julio would be in modern cricket. Neil Davies says, so Benny Howe finally makes a Lions appearance. No question, this any excuse to get you onto one of your favorite topics. Yes. No, look, it's extraordinary that it's taken this long, because if all the people who said Benny Howe won't translate at the top level are right, then why did it take them this long to check? If all the people who said that he will translate at this top level are right, then again, why is it taking them this long to check? It's a bit like the Matt Parkinson thing of, oh, he's too slow. At a certain point, you have to just bowl him a few times and see if that is the case. You can't just say he's too slow and never bowl him when he has the best figures consistently. So I think it's great that Benny Howe is getting a go. I do wonder if the wear and tear of all the rotations has made a mark on his bowling. He's not quite as dynamic as he used to be. You know, just watching him of recent times. But, you know, you look at his record. One of the things that they often said was what he does only works at the sort of out-groundy county grounds or the smaller county grounds where the pitches aren't as good. I've done the maths. His record on the test quality wickets is really good. And the reason is because he gets a lot of wicket caught at long off and long on. And so if you have bigger grounds, that actually helps him. I don't see where he fits into England's team unless Adil Rashid isn't playing. Other than that, maybe Moeen Ali is the other one. But other than that, I'm not sure there's a natural fit for him within the English team. But I'm very excited to see if they can. And I think if he does play in the IPL, obviously he's played in the 100, a little bit in the Big Bash, maybe plays in some other leagues. Nothing else. I'm hoping he inspires a bunch of other people to experiment with their bowling in the same way that he has. Christopher Hart says, what should the future of ODI and List A cricket be? ODI, I think, is easy. You save it for World Cups. Champions trophies if you want, if you're in the mood. List A is really confusing. I like the way that Cricket Australia play it in that one big block in one section. I think it's a good way to start a summer. People are always going to know how to play one-day cricket. Like, for instance, Nicholas Puran was in mine and Sid Monger's team of the World Cup. And even if you say, wow, maybe we were pushing him a little bit, he's still probably at that World Cup in the best 15 players. He hasn't played any one-day cricket. He still has the ability to play that format, even if it's probably hard for him to develop it in the same way. But as long as players are still playing it, I don't think there should be any problem with the World Cup. Plus, you would play friendlies coming into. We already see now there aren't that many T20s played in general until there's a World Cup coming up, and suddenly everyone's playing a T20 international, aren't they? Coming in one-day cricket, you could have a very similar system, which I really like. Ian says the double century series on Aubrey Faulkner was brilliant and ultimately tragic. Thank you, and sadly, yes. And he's also bringing up the Basil D'Oliveira double century, which I did last season or season before. They both lost. So in Faulkner's case, he lost his career kind of because of the war, and obviously Basil D'Oliveira didn't really start playing cricket until he was conservatives say his mid-30s. It's probably later than that. And so Faulkner ends up playing 25 tests and Basil Oliveira ends up playing 44. How much better could both of them have been if they played through their prime years? And ultimately, who missed out more? So it's a really, really good question. I think also with Aubrey Faulkner, he didn't just miss out on his prime years. He also missed out on the fact that people were still working out leg spin when he was light years ahead of everyone else. And he probably missed out on that, 10 years of being able to dominate as people were trying to catch up and, ultimately detect his wrong in a time when not that many people bowled a wrong at all. Which would have been really tough. So I think the war probably had a bigger impact on that part of it. But if Basil D'Oliveira was as good as he was, and his test record's still fantastic considering he never got proper training in South Africa. He played a lot of really shit, not really shit, that's unfair. League cricket in England was really good, but, cricket that he was way too good for in England. So he played cricket he was way too good for in South Africa. He played cricket he was way too good for in England. And then suddenly becomes a test player very quickly after that. And we also know that he's in his mid-30s. What does Basil D'Oliveira do going through a major, a proper coaching culture and, playing it against better players and all the advantages, even being a professional before he was, 35, all those sort of things, what would they have done for him? So I think it's probably a bigger impact on him. But having said that, Aubrey Faulkner only played 25 tests, was probably just coming into his prime as a batter when World War One started, and was also an absolutely brilliant bowler who was undetectable. So it's put big chunks into both of them. But all things considered, I would have thought that Basil D'Oliveira probably what he could have been, maybe it's unfair to say he could have been Sobers because he certainly wasn't as fast a bowler as Sobers, and I don't think he ever particularly was. But I think he certainly could have. I suppose they both could have been unquestionably all-time greats if we'd seen them play a lot more cricket and they'd been able to develop correctly. But it feels like Basil D'Oliveira is the one that could have been right at the top, whereas maybe Aubrey Faulkner would have been a very, very solid all-rounder that we talk about as, maybe just underneath Imran Khan and Garfield Sobers and Josh Callis and maybe Jadeja if he joins that group. And maybe D'Oliveira, it's hard because he developed so well and he was so good. It's hard to say, well, he'd average an extra 10 in test match cricket if he'd started at a younger age. Maybe he gets thrust into the system too young. It's a really interesting question, Ian. I suppose the correct answer here is they both would have been better, but whether their records would have looked better with more matches, I don't know. I think that's the right answer. Kennedy says, what one player would you pick to make the best entire team by themselves, like 11 copies of Root or Cummins? Would be an all-rounder, Kennedy. It would. Stokes is a really good one. Jason Holder and Ravi Jadeja, maybe not quite there, but yeah, I think Stokes is the most logical one. Problem is, if you have 11 Cummins, even though he can hold a bat, can't play spin, so you just played like 8 spinners against him, and all the Cummins would make like 5 runs. And Joe Root's bowling, pretty useless unless you're going up against a team of left-handers in the second innings. So you really need an all-rounder in that case. And I would say that Stokes is probably still the best option for that. Obviously, Cameron Green is interesting going forward. Ashwin might be another interesting one, perhaps, as well, just because his bowling is so dominant and he can, a few Ashwins holding the bat. Although, again, if you get him on a fast wicket or a seaming wicket, he's probably not as good with a bat. But I would probably still go with Stokes, but I'd have Green, Jadeja. Maybe I'd have Green Holder on standby for this team that we can't make. Although, if we had cloning stuff, I suppose we could. Will says, can you stop how you feel? Because a certain cricket competition keeps telling me otherwise through YouTube adverts. I haven't seen these YouTube adverts. So I don't know what that means, but can you stop how you feel? If you're feeling really happy and you pinch yourself really hard, you will stop feeling really happy. So yes. Will also says Ben Stokes turning England around. England falling apart under Joss Butler. Are you reconsidering your captaincy? Doesn't matter, Tate. No. Uh, Ben Stokes has obviously played a part in what happened with England, but McCullum probably played a bigger part, and the softballs have probably played the biggest part in that. So we're a long way away from knowing that. They've won a few tests on the trot, 4 tests on the trot. If they win 2 of their next 7, they'll still be roughly the level that I would have thought they would have been if South Africa somehow get past them. As far as the Butler thing, I've seen a lot of people kind of talking, not about Butler in general, but about England and their white ball team. I think England will be fine when the World Cups come around. They may not win them, but they'll be there and thereabouts as they've been Champions Trophy, World Cup, last 2 World T20s. This is the time you don't, in some ways between 2015 and 2017 when England were on a roll, they should have. They were trying to build a team, and then maybe between 2017 and 19, they almost needed to experiment more, and they continued that role. The 2015-2017 role they needed. Afterwards, you need to work out what's going to work in different environments and what's going to work with injuries, and I think since 2019 they've been much better at going. Okay, like we're going to go to play the Netherlands. We're probably going to win that series. Let's take all of our left arm bowlers and work out which one's best. Those sorts of things that they're currently doing, I find are more interesting. But it's also meaning they should lose more games, and I don't think that's a problem at all. I could be wrong, but I just don't think that's a problem at all. As long as they're getting back to peaking at the right time. And I suppose recent history, you would have to say England have been up for every tournament they've been in except for the World Test Championship. Will says, if every other Test second 11, development 11 was named after an animal like the England Lions, what would they be named? I suppose the Australian team would be the Emus. What's that stupid crocodile they have in? Is it the Agawal? No. What's the stupid crocodile with the big long snout they have in India? I'll go with that for them. Kudu in South Africa. What was the West Indian one? Was it the duckbills? Was that the Antigua duckbills or something like that? So I'm giving you I feel like I should know a Sri Lankan animal as well out there. No, I'm out. I do know Sri Lankan animals, but for some reason I haven't been able to get that. Sorry, Will. I gave you a couple though. He's asking another one. In a wacky sci-fi world where South Asian nations agreed to a combined side against the rest of the world 11 in Abu Dhabi to celebrate their mutual independence, who would you pick from both sides? I mean, that's a huge question. I can't really answer that for you, Will, off the top of my head, but it's very interesting. I'll try and have a think about it and get back to you if I can. AV says, who are the most underrated batters, bowlers, and all-rounders in World cricket currently? Is Neil Wagner still underrated? I feel like he's no longer underrated. I feel like he's probably correctly rated. Is Simon Harmer underrated outside of county cricket? I don't know. He's a very good player. Maharaj might be underrated as well. Karunaratne is probably someone that maybe doesn't get the credit he deserves. Who else out there probably plays above there? Dean Elgar's probably underrated, I would say. I remember having a conversation saying that he's not that far away from being an all-time opener if he plays at the level he's been playing at over the last few years. I think he had a dip not long after I said that, but there aren't that many openers who've managed to put together the kind of career of length that Dean Elgar has had, especially since he's opening in South Africa. I suppose Craig Brathwaite is underrated. I mean, his average is still middling, but geez, he's hard to get out, isn't he? Trying to think of anyone else out there. Suranga Lakmal probably was, but is now obviously retired. Yeah, that's maybe. I feel like there should be someone in Pakistan, but I can't think of anyone off the top of my head who's so wildly. Do they overrate or underrate their players? It's almost hard to get a good grip on them. But yeah, I think I think those are the ones that come to mind straight away. Anyway, thank you everyone for those questions. That was great. So that was the Patreon questions. Now let's. Oh, someone had their hand up in the room, but they've disappeared. So if anyone has a question in the room, feel free to put them through. Oh, apparently there's a problem in the room. But someone did put their hand up before. So if anyone does have a question in the room, oh, here he is. Vamshi, you there?
Hey Jared, how are you doing?
I'm really good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. So my question is, I read your article in April 2017 about how to build the ideal T20 site, and you had a bunch of different kinds of players. Has your opinion of that site changed now with 5 years? Now that 5 years have passed?
I can't even remember what I wrote. Oops, sorry. I can't even remember what I wrote. I can't even remember what I wrote. I'm being honest.
You had a crusher. You had the hitters from 3 to 7, and then the slow starting quick scorer, the finisher.
Yeah, I think my basic plan would be fairly similar. You still want a player who can play kind of no matter what's happening, if the ball's ragging or if the ball's seaming. I think you want one of those players in your 11. I think you want someone who can knock the lacquer off the ball almost straight away. Then you want a succession of hitters, and if you're lucky enough, you probably want one or even two bowlers who can hit sixes, not necessarily be batters, but be able to hit sixes. The only thing I would probably add that probably isn't there is I think it's really important to have a middle overs seam bowler, because I think what it does is it allows you to move your spin around more tactically. So if you've got two spinners in your lineup, it allows you to use one in the power play if needed and hold one back if there's good matchups if needed. Whereas I think traditionally it was like, over 7 to 14 would be for spin. And I think the Pakistanis probably always knew that a good seam bowler in the middle was quite handy. But I with Liam Plunkett becoming successful and Pat Cummins, perhaps Lockie Ferguson, I'm trying to think of some of the other countries who do it as well. I think what we've seen is that kind of bowler who bowls in the middle but bowls wicket-taking deliveries and is a little bit undervalued perhaps from outside is really, really handy going ahead. So that's one position I don't remember writing about, and correct me if I'm wrong. But I would have thought in 2017 I wouldn't have had that idea as much. But I think everyone else is pretty, the basic team. The only difference is that I probably have now the ability to say there are multiple different ways to. Yeah, so that was that. I mean, that was the ideal team, but you could have a team where in your top 6 you have a wicket keeper and you have 2 bowlers who can average, let's say, 2 overs each, perhaps, which would allow you to bowl, at 7, 8, and 9. Maybe you might have 7 and 8, for instance. You might have all rounders who their bowling isn't there. Maybe they're strong, or their bowling may not be an automatic selection, but because you've got 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 who can all bowl, and you've got, let's say, 1 and 2 who can bowl, you now have 7 bowling options that you can mix and match. So that is another way of going into it that I probably didn't mention. The other one is it's impossible to do it at a franchise level correctly. We saw Chennai kind of do it, but those kind of endless all-rounder lineups, which is a bit like what I'm saying, but more so that you would bat, Jadeja at 5, Dhoni at 6, Curran at 7, Bravo at 8, those sorts of lineups as well, which is similar to what I was saying, but maybe a slight variation on it, is also something else that is that we have seen work. But it's very hard to do that as a franchise because all-rounders usually go for a lot more money. So, you can only afford so many all-rounders in any side realistically, unless you find a bunch of players who are undervalued. So like when Chennai did with Moeen Ali, if you can pick up a couple of players, like Shardul probably was, like Deepak Chahar probably was, you can then build a bit of a all-roundery team. But I really don't think, I'd have to go back, I really don't think there have been that many teams of franchise cricket who have ever managed to legitimately have what you would call 8 frontline batters, and I'm talking T20 batters more than batters, but 8 frontline batters and 6 frontline bowling attacks. Whereas we have seen the West Indies and England do that. I'm trying to think if India have ever done it as well. It's probably an easier thing to do if you're an international side, but that's kind of the dream, right? Like if you can have, your top 8 all being able to bat, that means your numbers 1 and 2 can swing as hard as you want. And then you have, and then further down, with your bowling, you then have the flexibility to be more tactical with your bowling. So this guy's actually a really good bowler, but Sam Curran's a really good example of this, or David Willey, of they're really good, but we really only want to use them for 3 overs. We don't want them to have to bowl that 4th over, because that 4th over is going to come when everyone's set or when the ball is old. But if we can get through 2 or 3 overs of them in the first 8 overs, then as long as the ball's swinging, we should be okay. And, the same with, a lot of players who are called all-rounders in T20 cricket aren't really all-rounders, right? And so, again, what you want is... So Moeen Ali and Ravi Jadeja at Chennai is a perfect example of a kind of harmony built in. So if you've got one at one end and one at the other end, and you've got one right-hander and one left-hander, you've got one good matchup, one bad matchup all the time, which is kind of neutral matchups. On the days when there's a team with too many left-handers, you just bowl Moeen Ali more. And on days when there's too many right-handers, you bowl Ravi Jadeja more. What you see when those players are on their own and they don't have that sort of backup to them, they're not as useful, right? So you can make Moeen Ali and Jadeja far better in those sorts of lineup. That's what you can do if you have the 6 bowlers or 7 bowlers is perfect, obviously. Although that confuses captains. But... that kind of lineup can be built in international cricket. I think is easier than franchise cricket. Although the problem you have with international cricket is, I always go back to the Scotland problem of their 2 best spinners were both left arm finger spinners. Very different kinds of left arm finger spinners, but that's a bit of an issue, especially as you go up to the high levels of cricket and there are more left handers available. That becomes a problem in international cricket where you have role overlap. I don't know if role overlap's a thing. I might have invented that phrase. But you know what I mean by that. You have 2 players who do this. So I'm trying to think of a situation in an international team that might be like this.
How about Pandya and Jadeja? With Pandya and Jadeja becomes a little more effective.
Yeah. So here's a perfect one for you. Akshar Patel and Jadeja maybe should both play for India.
Wow, I didn't.
Right? If you look at Jadeja, if you look at Akshar's batting and his bowling ability, and you look at Jadeja's bowling ability and his batting, their batting matches up quite nice. Jadeja can bat at probably 5 or 6, maybe 7, and Akshar can come in at number 8. But the problem is that the role overlap when they're bowling is, how many times are you ever going to get a game where you can bowl 8 overs of left arm finger spin?
Right.
Whereas if one of them was an off spinner, they become Moeen Ali and Ravi Jadeja again, right? Suddenly, it's perfect. So Moeen Ali and Jadeja work even better than when it comes to batting, because Moeen Ali can bat anywhere 1 to 5, right? And could probably bat 8 if they needed him to, although he's probably too expensive to bat 8. And then Jadeja can bat 5, 6, 7, 8 when required. They can hold him right back to the end or whatever situation they want. That is a perfect situation where you don't have any role overlap. Whereas if you had Akshar and Jadeja in the same team, you see this role overlap is something you see with test teams all the time, where what happens is they end up picking 3 or 4, like they'll pick like 4 seamers in a team, but they'll all be new ball seamers. It's like that new ball doesn't last any longer because you've got more new ball bowlers, right? And we saw New Zealand really have trouble with that this summer in England, especially because it became an old ball summer. And they didn't have an old ball bowler until they brought Wagner in very much, for the last test. And kind of the horse had already bolted. But the problem was all their bowlers wanted the new ball. And so you've moved Jameson to first change, which is fine because he's so good, it doesn't matter, right? But you look at that lineup and you're like, well, how is this going to work? Everyone wants to bowl in the first 25, 30 overs. No one wants to bowl from overs 30 to 60 here. And that's that's why first change bowlers are more important. I mean, he's a weird hobby horse for me, but that's why first change bowlers are more important than opening bowlers. You can find opening bowlers in first class cricket right around the world. Finding a first change bowler is like, it's really, really hard, which is why part of the reason that West Indies did so well was the fact that they, in that first incarnation especially, was the fact they had Joel Garner, right? So, and that's why I think Pat Cummins would have a better record if he opened the bowling for Australia. But the best thing for Australia is that he never opens the bowling because he's probably, Pat Cummins, Morne Morkel, Joel Garner, Neil Wagner. You're talking about the best first change bowlers in the world that we've ever had, right? And Pat Cummins is probably he's probably right up there with Garner, being just a next level first change bowler. They're not easy to find, and so that role overlap that I'm talking about becomes a really big thing in T20 cricket, where the worst place in T20 cricket is when everyone opens the batting and they all want to open the batting, and there's like, so there's a big fight within the change room to see who opens the batting. Then there's a big fight to see who bats at number 3, right? And then you've got a guy batting at number 4 who really should be batting in the top 3 but isn't. And so when you're putting your team together, you need to understand that. That's probably when you're talking about that article from before of mine, that's probably the thing that I would spend a lot more time on now, is making sure that you've got fast starters and slow starters. You don't want a team of slow starters. A team of fast starters probably doesn't matter, but a team of slow starters can be a huge problem, unless they're all incredible players. You obviously want to mix and match of your skills so that every kind of version of spin and seam bowling can be hit. You don't just want a team that hits right arm seam, which a lot of T20 franchises do around the world. It's 50% of the. I'm trying to remember if it's Chris Len. I think no, actually, he might be good against left. There was one particular player I looked at, and their record against right arm seam was something like an average of 45 and a strike rate of 160, and their average against everyone else was like 22 and a strike rate of 120. And there are a lot of players out there, especially a lot of the guys that come out of England are a bit like this. They can stand in place, and because they're brought up on bowling machines and throwdowns, and they will just absolutely pang you everywhere. And then you slow the ball down or use the other arm, and suddenly they just don't have the same skills available. All those sorts of things I know a lot more about now than I did in 2017. But thanks for your question, man.
You did actually have the Lane Plunkett thing. You did want a quicker bowler who you could use between 6 and 12, someone whose economy
Jeez, I'm clever. I was ahead of my own time, man. I wouldn't have thought that would have been. I wonder why. Did I mention Plunkett in it?
Yep, you had Plunkett, Mal Mills.
Okay. Yeah, actually, no, you're right. I would have. Yeah, no, it would have been around that time that maybe I came up with that. Hassan Ali did it in the Champions Trophy. Obviously, Wasem Akram used to do it, right? I mean, it's a newer position, but Pakistan were maybe one of the few teams that worked it out. They did it partially because of reverse swing, but they also did it because they realized that you can get in a rhythm against spinners. And then the Liam Plunkett development, of course, is having the 4 fielders out means that spinners can get hit a little bit more towards the back end between the 30th and the 40th over. And so that's really where you need that you need the seamer available to you. Anyway, man, thank you very much for your question.
Thanks, Jarrod.
Anyone else wants to come and do a request? I've probably got time for 1 or 2 more. But Siddhartha says, what would do better, a cricketer in baseball or a baseballer in cricket? That's a really interesting question. Well, it's harder to hit a baseball than it is to hit a cricket ball. So there's no doubt that the specialized skill of a batter in baseball is probably a little bit more full on. But if you're only trying to hit everything over deep mid wicket and you're not particularly used to bounce, I'm not sure how that lines up. I think a baseballer in cricket is far more likely to hit the ball than a cricketer is in baseball. But I don't necessarily think that means over a long period of time the baseballer would be more successful, because I'm not sure it's easy to go from full tosses to bouncing balls, whereas at cricket we do have full tosses, and that is also part of the game. So that's the batting. The pitching and bowling is probably slightly two different kinds of athletes, I would think. I know we have a lot of bowlers with good arms. We have a lot of batters with good arms as well. I mean, Benny Howell is a perfect example. He's a batter with a good arm who was a baseball pitcher who became a slow medium bowler. So I think in that particular case, I'm not sure that goes over. One thing I would say, it's funny, I was talking to some cricket people today, and I was saying that I think bowlers are better at being able to switch between a multitude of deliveries than baseball pitchers are. Baseball pitchers usually have, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas if you think about it, if you're a seam bowler and you bowl red and white ball cricket, you probably need 5 deliveries almost automatically. So maybe there's a slightly extra. There's more things you can do with the ball in cricket. So there's that. But I don't know if a pitcher comes over. I would think that in the outfield, I wonder if cricket would be better suited to come up with catches behind the plate, and if baseball would be better to have outfielders. I mean, I think it's pretty widely thought that baseball fielders are better in the outfield. But I should say, we don't recruit cricketers based on their skill in the outfield, whereas baseball does. So it actually makes sense that baseballers are better in the outfield, not just that their skills and training and the glove all make a difference there. But really interesting question. All right, Vamshi's going to finish up. All right, last one, Vamshi. What have you got for me, man?
So this was more in terms of the 5th test between England and India, and also the series before that was played last year. So my friends think that Ashwin would have been a better pick, and I think that India were better to go with a faster bowler, because after the new ball bowlers are done, you're essentially bowling with a spinner in the 13th or 14th over, which I think would be disadvantages. What is your take on that?
No, because they would have 3 seamers, wouldn't they? Still,
but once the third seamer...
Well, you wouldn't be bowling your spinner in the 13th over if you've got 3 seamers. You'd at least get through to the 22nd over before they'd need any sort of a break. I think that Jadeja is a wonderful bowler, but I don't think he's particularly good first innings bowler. And I think he needs the conditions to help keep pressure on. I think he can defend a little bit on flat pitches, and that can sometimes be beneficial. Whereas I think Ashwin scares the shit out of England. I think he will always keep the pressure on almost any batter in the world, especially left-handers. I think when that ball got soft and we know England were going to attack, I'd love to see them try and pull that off against Ashwin if there was any help in the surface. I've been saying for a long time, India have the ideal bowling attack and they don't use it, which is Jadeja, Ashwin, and pick your 3 seamers, Bumrah, Shami, and whoever else is in form on that day. That for me is an ideal. Also, Ashwin is a better bat than Shardul. I see all the Lord Shardul stuff seems to have died down. Now they can't make runs anymore. His batting average in Test cricket is quickly dipping to where it is in first-class cricket. Right now, I still think he can average a little bit more in Test cricket than he does in first-class cricket. But is he a better bat than Ashwin? I don't think so. Certainly don't think he would be able to give you it. I think I've started calling these sorts of guys, him and, I mean, he's a better bat than Broad, but him and someone like Broad, Mitchell Stark might even be there. They're kind of chaos hitters. And they can really...
put that on your thing with Neil Manthra.
I put that there, did I? Yeah. Yeah, that sort of... And so I can see that Shardul has some benefit there, but Ashwin's just a better bat than him. And it's far more likely to give you consistent runs. And also, he's batting at number 8, far more likely to back up Jadeja or Rishabh Pant or whoever's batting with him. And so,
They were really
on top of that,
sorry. They were really quick to move away from it after the World Test Championship final, where it didn't seem to work.
I think they've always moved away from Ashwin, away from home. I don't really understand it because Jadeja is the far worst bowler away from home. And I get that you have to fit Jadeja in now because of his all-round skills. I don't know. I just think 3 seamers is still a lot of seamers. For some reason, we've convinced ourselves. When Australia went generations with only 3 seamers, right? Even England have gone generations with only 3 seamers. New Zealand have gone generations with only 3 seamers. Like, you're lucky if you could fit a 4th seamer in. And if you're telling me that the player you're going to drop is the world's best spinner who can also bat, who is going to be a challenge from the 1st innings to the 4th innings, and at the very least is going to keep, in the way that Rangana Harath did for Sri Lanka, he may not have always got wickets away from home. You couldn't just run down and smack him, right? And you couldn't milk him the way that you milk Jadeja. Why would you not want that flexibility in your side? So, look, you're right. I think they tried it in the World Test Championship and they haven't felt comfortable with it ever since. Shardul's got a really good record. I don't think he's got that many wickets, though, does he? Has he got 25 wickets?
He has. I think he has a couple of 6-wicket hauls, one in South Africa and another one in England, I think.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of wickets in a couple of games, and he's got a really good bowling average at the moment. But he has a lot of flaws within his bowling as well.
Definitely, yeah.
That I would never feel that comfortable. Put it this way, go back and watch that 5th test. There was a lot of times, as someone who was commentating, it felt like they were basically down to 2 bowlers and Jadeja as a spoiler, right? Siraj wasn't in form, right? And that can happen. And I still think he's a fantastic bowler, but he hasn't looked good for a little while. Bowled very poorly in the IPL as well. Shardul couldn't keep any pressure on. And, he got that Ben Stokes wicket largely because England thought he was a joke. Now, maybe that works, but in long term, that's probably not going to work. If you take him out and you put Ashwin in, you've now got Jadeja as the spoiler, you've got Bumrah and Shami bowling incredible spells, and you've got Ashwin toiling away at the other end. And Siraj doesn't come off. That's a completely different bowling lineup for me. Completely different bowling lineup. I would Bairstow's a great player of off spin, and then there's Ashwin, right?
Yeah.
I personally, if I was running Indian cricket, that's where I would be going. They don't seem to see it the same way that I see it. But if you go back, mate, and read me in 2012, I was saying the same thing. Ashwin got dropped after playing in Australia, where I thought he bowled magnificently, right? I thought he was outstanding in Australia, but he didn't end up with a low bowling average, and they barely used him overseas for, 3, 4, 5 years after that, right? Based on the fact that he didn't take wickets in Australia, and I think there might have been another test he played in South Africa. So 2 places where finger spin traditionally had never worked. He didn't go particularly well in, and they sort of, for me, they gave up the ability to develop him, right? Because he should be a better bowler. I know this sounds weird. He should be an even better bowler now because he should have spent the last 10 years bowling overseas more. And they haven't always used him in those conditions. Obviously, in Asia, it's a no-brainer. But we see the way he bowls outside of Asia now. He could have done that 5 years ago if he'd had that experience. He's a fast learner. And I think we don't talk about this enough. He's an incredibly competitive person, right? I don't know if I've ever told this story. I've been saving it I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, but I've been saving it in case I ever get him on my podcast. I will get him on my podcast, but I once swam in a swimming pool with R. Ashwin, right? We were both much younger. It was 2009, I think, in Sri Lanka, and a tri-series with them in New Zealand. And we were all in the same complex, and I was staying there as well. And I was actually there on holiday randomly, and it happened to be that all these cricket teams were ruining my holiday. But he was in the same swimming pool as me, and I was doing laps, and he started. It was quite clear he was trying to compete with me in laps, and I used to be a lifeguard. You know, I was trained to be a lifeguard, so I'm quite a strong swimmer. So I was holding him off, and then after a while, I did butterfly because I thought there's no way he's going to be able to. There's no way he's going to be able to do butterfly. Only Australians and about 7 Americans ever seem to be able to do butterfly. And it's probably the last time I ever did butterfly. My shoulders haven't been the same since. But he was really. He didn't know who I was. I was just a guy in the pool, but I could feel that he was competitive there. That's another thing. I'm not saying the other cricketers aren't competitive, but that's a really important thing for a spinner away from home, right? Away from Asia, let's say. Oh no, away from home. I will keep that. In conditions that don't favor you, that Shane Warne edge, that Graham Swan edge, that or Kumble, right? Those sorts of people where there's just like, no, you might not go out to me, but you're not going to get on top of me. That's a really, really important thing. And if you look at some of the spinners, you look at someone like Jack Leach, he doesn't have that, right? I think his bowling's improved of recent times, but he doesn't have that edge, that uber competitive nature to make sure that he's always in the contest. And I think that was pretty evident with Ash really early on in his career. And I would have nourished that as much as possible, especially because you and I probably know he's not a number 7 away from India, but he's a really good number 8 away from India. And so you could stack your batting lineup and even have slightly more experimental batting lineups ahead of him, knowing that you have a really strong number 8, knowing that teams are never going to get on top of him. And I think they probably missed a trick with that. And now they've got so many bowling options, right? That they're obsessed with seam at the moment. They just are. That they're almost not using him in the way that I think they probably should.
Right.
Anyway, mate, thank you very much for your question.
That was a great story, Jarrod. Thank you.
No worries. I don't know. Maybe I have told that. There'll always be someone in the comments or on Twitter who'll say, Jarrod, you've told that story before. I don't think I've ever told it on one of my podcasts, but I can't wait to get him on a podcast once. And there's no way he'll remember it. But I've got lots of details that I didn't do in that one. But thanks for your question, Vamshi. Thanks to you, Siddharth, as well. And thanks to everyone on Patreon. Great questions as always. And I will see you all next week. Have a good one.